there are so many myths around Peter. One of the big ones right now that people are talking about is the whole ban around, the Jordan 1. And I remember quizzing Peter about that. And, he said to me, the shoe was never really banned as such. The NBA were not happy with the colorway, but he said to me, we had 30,000 pairs of shoes that were on a ship steaming its way to the US. Yeah, Michael was now not going to be able to wear that shoe. So what the hell were we going to do? How are we going to get people to wear it? Best thing you can do to create demand is almost restrict it from people.
Welcome to OSD, back again. Thank you to everyone who has been tuning in and watching all of the great guests and information we've been sharing so far. We're back with another amazing episode. We can't wait to get into it. But before we do, you guys know how we do. We have a couple of things that are really good for us to bring up and check the pulse of what's going on in the sneaker community.
Yeah.
And D Wells, I want to talk about one that I posted on my social media
Oh
um,
man.
the other day that got a ton of engagement um, with stores in New York like Stadium Goods shutting down, Converse, sneakers and stuff filing for bankruptcy and shutting down their main location. There's been a lot going on in terms of changes in retail. I've done a retail dive. I haven't done one in a while just simply because I wasn't healthy enough to do so, but I did one the other day. And
Yeah.
retail for sneakers is awful.
It's tough, man. It's really tough right now. I mean, that article was so you were so on target to bring it up because I had been reading so much, about Stadium Goods, and you hear stuff about StockX, you hear stuff even about basically the consignment stores as well as the big box stores are closing. I mean, Converse is shutting down stores, Stadium Goods.
Nike on the Upper
Well,
West Side of Manhattan is or
exactly. I mean,
Upper
we've talked
East
about this
Side. Mhm.
and the great reset that it is, and I say that, the culling is happening. It's happened already, and it's gonna unfortunately, I think it's gonna get a little bit worse.
Yeah.
What's gonna be really interesting to see is companies like JD Sports, Foot Locker, and some of the bigger box stores. What happens with them? Are they gonna close any doors just to get lean and mean, or are they going to kind of rebrand or kind of reposition themselves and go with the kind of like take the tack like we really need to connect back with the community, with the sneakerheads, with the people that are obsessed with sneakers, the people that want to know more information behind the story. So that's going to be the thing that I think uh, that could be the saving grace to retail because they moved away from that, right? Like that didn't that went away, unfortunately. So we shall see.
The
We shall
question I
see.
want to put out there to our viewers before we bring in our guest on this topic and introduce him is who's next to
Right.
close? Both retail and resale establishments are closing or changing up strategy. Case of Stadium Goods, they didn't renew their lease, but they want to focus on online. But all the other stores we mentioned, it's straight up closure, like shutting down. A
Yeah.
lot of resale outfits have closed over the last couple of years because they all thought that it was never going to end, and it has. But who is next? We'd love to hear from you guys. Drop a
Yeah.
comment below in the video. And without further ado, as we do that and bring in our guests, the esteemed, long time coming, known on social media as Made by Jace, Mr. Jason Coles, author of Peter Moore, Sneaker Legend. I don't have the air horn, but here it is. Jace, what's up, man?
Yeah, good. Great to see you, Sean. Great to see you, D. It's been a long time coming, as you say. I've been following you guys for years, and I love what you guys do with social studies and everything.
Thank
You're
you.
you're out there, you're educating people. We need more of you guys out there.
Thank you.
No,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
That's what we educating to get more of us out here.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what are you seeing across the pond where you're at? Tell everybody where you're at and what you're seeing.
Well, I know you were just talking about retail, and strangely enough, here, I mean, we're seeing a lot of the kind of the smaller independent stores going by the way, which is, is just sad, because those are the stores that kind of the heart and soul of the community in many ways. People don't go there not just to buy shoes, but just to hang out and meet each other and chat. Whereas it seems all the big box stores like, JD, especially here in Foot Locker, they actually, I mean, they seem to be doing well,
Mm,
but you know, I kind of feel they're a bit soulless. They just don't have that kind of community feel as much as they try. Um, I also think it's interesting how the big brand stores, so Adidas especially, those stores seem to have become almost more like showrooms because I think they know that more and more people are buying their shoes online, but they still want to go in, they still want to kind of see the shoes, they want to try them on.
mhm,
But Adidas, especially, I guess, and Nike seem to be getting there as well. I've kind of realized that they got to create a kind of experience now. It can't just
mhm.
be sneakers on a shelf. You got to create a kind of brand experience. So that seems to be happening more and more over this side, which is really interesting.
That's pretty cool.
Wow.
Is that because of more of the multi-sport appeal that brings people in to buy shoes, do you think?
I think so. I mean, I guess what I'm seeing more and more here is it's the collabs. Especially more and more people want to come in, see not just the shoe, but the stores do some great kind of environments. Around these
Mm,
collabs. Um, I think also it's a case of you know I think that those classic shoes, especially, I'm seeing a lot of the young people here are. I mean, we all know they're all loving the Sambas right now, and we're seeing a lot of people wearing, um, the Adidas Japans and
Mhm.
New Balance, especially. And I think that whatever it is about those classic shoes that is actually getting people back in to stores, I think it's because there's a bit of history around those shoes especially, and what the stores are doing really well is kind of creating that, like I was saying, that experience. So you go in, you don't just buy the shoe, but you learn the whole story behind it.
understood. Yeah.
Yep, yep. Welcome in our brand director, the man, Steve Ridiculous Gordon.
What's up,
Sorry for
everybody?
the
Hey,
confusion,
Steve.
brother. Welcome in.
Yeah. Appreciate you. I was on Central Standard Time here in the States, so had the wrong start time, but I'm here. Appreciate you. Jason was good. Welcome in. Continue, please.
No, we want you to weigh in on the state of sneaker retail and resale with all the stores closing
Mm,
and stuff. Weigh in
Mm,
on that real quick before we dive into the good stuff.
yeah, it's front of mind. We always talk about this. Even I myself find it a struggle to go into here in the States, a JD, a store, a mall, when my tastes are so very specific that I can go find what I want specifically and have it shipped to me. So, as
mm,
Jason was saying, to get me into a store, it would have to be an experience. It usually happens when I travel. When I
mhm.
travel to Europe, I'm seeing, along with what Jason said, also those classic styles are starting to bubble back up in new colorways. I just came across, I was in Paris this summer for the Paralympics and just came across a great selection of Lunar runners were back, and I was
Yeah.
amazed at that because I hadn't seen them in the States here yet.
Mm.
That drew me into the store, something I hadn't seen, something that's not easily, I can't order it and have it shipped over very easily. So things like that are what are driving retail right now. The experience,
Yeah.
um, the rarity is starting to come back with some of those styles that now people don't even know about Lunar. Like for us, that's a huge thing.
Right.
Lunar was kind of tantamount to Boost or any of the new Addy foams. Lunar was crazy back in the day, and those styles were something we had never seen with that accordion pattern on the midsole. Uh, to have that sitting on a shelf in a bright pink and gray as compared to some of the flatter tones, the darker tones, that drew me in right off the street. So, in terms of retail, it's really hard now for me to simply wander into a store, as you said, Jason, shoes on a shelf, don't get it. I've got those already.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Welcome in. Welcome in. So we're going to get right into it, Jace. We got a fantastic journey for you to discuss in the making of
Yeah.
little more.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
So where does this start for you? Where's the sneaker journey start, man? I mean, it's hard to tell where when you look at your social, but you dive in. You dig in the crates, as they say musically. So where does this start for you?
Well, I mean, I guess like probably you, all of you guys. I mean, I guess we were all kind of a similar age. It started on the street, as a kid. I'm from that generation where we spent most of our time outdoors. I, I know my family. The kid, we were like cats. The parents put us out in the morning. We didn't come home until the street lights turned on, and you were always in your sneakers, and they were part of your kind of identity, I guess. And I mean, my family, because I used to wear shoes out like crazy. I could get through 3, 4 pairs of sneakers a year, and so my mother would never spend money on sneakers when I was a kid. So I always ended up in I don't know if there's a brand that we had here. I don't know if you guys ever had it called High Tech.
Oh,
And
Yep.
yeah, High
yeah.
Tech was this kind of cheap brand. The shoes were okay, but they were like deeply unfashionable. And you know, I remember other kids laughing at me for wearing High Techs. I mean, kids who were wearing Dunlop Green Flash were laughing at me. You know, dogs would cross the street to avoid me wearing my high tech. So I never got to wear, I guess decent sneakers when I was, much younger. But I guess I kind of had an epiphany moment where suddenly sneakers suddenly became important to me, which was the Nike Hirachi was the first one. I still remember seeing the commercial with Michael Johnson. He was kind of all decked out in purple spandex,
Mhm.
and they showed this shoe, and just seeing that shoe, and I have one of the retros they did with me. That shoe just blew my mind when it first came out. It was like nothing that I'd ever seen before. And as soon as I saw them, I just knew I gotta have a pair.
Mhm.
And I did chores, I did jobs, I did, everything I could just to make some money. And, it took me a few months, but I managed to grab a pair. And I still remember, that special moment, opening the box and pulling back the paper. And, it was like that scene in Indiana Jones where he first sees the Holy Grail, you know. And bizarrely, I can still remember the smell because they have this neoprene,
Good
which
thing.
always had this smell,
Yeah.
and yeah, it was like Chanel number 5, that smell. Um, so this is the shoe that kind of started it all for me, and I still to this day I think it's an amazing looking shoe,
Agreed.
and yeah, so that this is the one where suddenly I became switched on to the whole
Mhm.
sneaker thing. And strangely enough, I mean, I guess like a lot of people, it suddenly my mind became aware of branding, design, and that's kind of where I can almost trace back that whole interest because that's kind of been, a big chunk of my career was in branding and design, and I ended up working in sports marketing. Well, I still work in sports marketing, and I can almost trace it back to seeing that commercial, seeing that shoe. Yeah.
What was the UK scene like at the time in terms of what people were wearing on their feet and even like the urban apparel? What was that like?
Well, back then, I mean, we're talking 80s, early 90s, and I guess in the UK it was really dominated by tennis in many ways.
Mhm.
What guys like McEnroe and Borg had been wearing, and then guys like Edberg, all
Mhm.
those kind of guys, and football. What you guys would call it soccer, but football. always had its kind of own fashion on it, its own kind of fashion ecosystem. And obviously, you can't wear cleats, but these guys kind of adopted tennis for their fashion. So people were wearing Adidas, Diodoras, Wimbledon's, Nike Wimbledon's. Um, those were the kind of things that you would see people wearing. Reebok also was coming pretty big at that time. Reebok Classics.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know if that kind of reflects what's happening in the US. I think it was probably more of a UK thing, but yeah, terrace culture in the UK was a huge thing, and
Right.
especially it kind of was born, I suppose, in the north of England, because a lot of
Mm.
the northern UK football teams, so Liverpool, Manchester United, those guys were their fans were regularly going into Europe, and they were buying up models from those brands which you just couldn't get in the UK,
Right.
Mm.
and they were bringing those back in by the bag load. And if you had those shoes that you just couldn't get here, you know, you were like royalty. I mean, you were something else. You were something special.
Right.
Uh, so football kind of had a huge influence, and tennis. What tennis players? We would watch Wimbledon as much for what they were wearing as for the tennis back then.
Hell yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's
Sure.
Yeah.
really interesting because here in the States, I don't think it was dissimilar.
Right.
Here we would call it country club culture. So
Okay.
your K Swiss, so a lot of your tennis apparel and gear was not so much a sporting thing here, but a class thing. And so there were
Sure.
there were class culture wars of the 80s and 90s, and your gear, your prep school gear, gave you a certain look that was very similar to what you described.
Right, right. Yeah. And I guess the other big difference was that basketball was never big in the UK. So we didn't really I mean, you could get Jordans and you could get the basketball shoes, but it wasn't a big thing. So, a lot of people have rewritten their history to say, oh, yeah, no, I was wearing Jordans back in the day. And,
Right,
and here, uh, a lot of those guys really weren't, because you just didn't get them.
right.
Jason calls bullshit.
Yep. Yeah. You just pinned it on the board, literally.
So,
Yeah.
so
Absolutely.
I wanted to touch a little bit there though, because we don't have too many guests from across the pond on here. I wanted to touch a little bit more though on the terrace wear effect.
Yeah.
Because
Mhm.
we actually teach, through social studies, we actually teach about some of the international effects and the way sneakers are perceived in other countries. And in a master's level and an MBA level class that we teach, we talk a little bit about the influence of terrace wear and
Mhm.
how Adidas was leading the way with some models like trim trabs and stuff like that. Is that sort of on base and in line with what you guys were experiencing?
Absolutely. Yeah. It was, as I say, it was because I think originally, like the trim trap, you couldn't buy it here. I think that was like a German market model. So the
Uh-huh.
guys that were wearing those shoes, and the Forest Hills is another kind of legendary
Yeah.
uh, um, terrace shoe. Um, it was very much about those kind of shoes, and yeah, I think those shoes are still incredibly popular today. I mean, the whole rise of Adidas Special, everything that Gary Aston does, and I don't know how big Special is in the US, but here it's kind of like a cult.
Mhm.
Um, that brand especially just resonates so much, especially with buyers in the UK.
Mhm.
And a lot of it is kind of nostalgia. The guys back then who you know quite often couldn't buy those shoes back then, but now they're much older. They can afford those
You can
shoes.
afford them.
They can get them.
Right.
And so Special has a huge following in the UK, and I mean it seems to be spreading out. Gary's been doing an amazing job of kind of democratizing that out a bit more, and I see a lot more younger people wearing those kind of shoes now, which is great to see, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, D, I stepped all over you. Go ahead. Your
No,
turn.
no. I really wanted Jason to talk about the terrace because it's not something that people in United States know about unless they've traveled. I mean, the big thing is being able to travel and see what's popping, what's hot in other countries, other states. I mean, when you talked about just Dunlop, I mean,
Mm,
talk about taking it back to tennis. I mean, I was having a conversation, and you think about Michael Chang and what he did,
Yeah.
with that, I mean, tennis
yeah.
was like you said, we watched it not just for the matches, but what
Yeah.
were they wearing, what brands, and just how big they became. What was a brand that you kind of, I mean, we talk about your love of the Huarache, but, like,
Mm.
were there some other brands that when you started kind of paying attention to, the fashion side of it and just what looked good on you, what you liked, what were you into?
Well, some of those brands around that time, especially. So you had like Diodora and
Mhm.
Fila and Alessi, all those brands. I mean, those guys are still around, but back then, they were huge, and it
Yeah.
was because the tennis players especially were wearing those brands,
Hmm.
and so yeah, they were expensive, but if you could get your hands on them, instant street cred.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and then also, again, I think most people who don't know their geography often don't realize that with the UK being a former part of the EU, it's still an island. And
Oh yeah,
so it's still overseas for you all to get to mainland Europe. And so, as you said, some of those imports from other countries, when we get something from 8 hours away, it's still in the US. It's just from
right.
another state. When you get something 8 hours away, that's from another country, Italy, Spain, Germany. And I think that that had a huge effect
Yeah.
on that terrace aspect of fashion.
Yeah, that's great.
Where did that
Absolutely.
term come from? I mean, are you familiar? I mean, where did terrace come from? Is it because of the architectural structures and everything like that? Like, I remember hearing it in music first, but
Right. Yeah. Well,
what is
it
the
comes
history?
from yeah, it comes from the stadium. So back in the day, most football stadiums in the UK, they didn't have seats, or they had huge sections that didn't have seats, but they had terraces. So you would
Mm,
stand in the terrace,
Hmm.
and they almost became like fashion parades, the terraces, because the football fans would come along. They always wanted to be wearing the latest stuff, and so I think they I'm probably doing those guys a disservice, but they probably spent as much time checking out each other's threads as they were watching the match.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's where the term terrace comes from. The fact that that was it. That was the hotbed of fashion was on the football terraces.
That's
yeah,
so cool. That
that
is
was
so
so
cool.
that would be equatable, and Sean, you could relate, and Steve, you've seen this, but back in the day, downtown Brooklyn, the Albee Square Mall, uh, and Fulton Street was the fashion show because
Yes,
Oh,
yeah, yeah,
I'll
yeah.
do you one. I'll do you one better. Easter in Times Square.
oh man,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah,
Easter in Times
Absolutely.
Square was like a forced rite of passage to go get fresh and show up
show off,
in
Yeah.
yeah,
Times Square to be seen in your latest wears. So,
yeah,
Right.
I
Yeah.
think the thing about terrace wear, which it lives in fame and infamy at the same time, is what it ended up evolving to due to the you know loyalists and the allegiance to teams and
Hmm.
that's the thing that I think has always caused for me terrace wear and the connection to hooliganism to sort of draw a parallel to what happens over here in the States, where there's the haves and the must haves and the have nots, and people who are willing to do whatever it takes to take something from somebody else because they didn't have it. So there's this over in the UK and other countries that has spread to it was because of the allegiance to a team, and you can
Hmm.
kind of tell who was for what team based on what they're wearing, right,
Oh,
Jason?
absolutely.
And over here is a similar thing in, unfortunately, what neighborhoods and what
Yeah.
gangs and what affiliations you had that caused
Yeah.
that kind of violence too. So, I've always been sort of intrigued by, the international parallel that exists between what happens here in the States, which is sort of senseless, and even, hooliganism and terrorist wear. So thank you for that, Jason. Appreciate you giving us some insight on that. But let's move into the good stuff on while we're here. Um, let's talk about your writing, man. Where did this start? Because you went from being made fun of with the wrong
Yeah.
things on, and the folks at wearing Dunlops laughing at you, to here we are today. You have written one of the hottest books in the entire sneaker literary world. Period.
Well, thanks for saying that. Yeah. I guess it really began actually. So I've always worked in creative roles in the sports business, and the firm I was at, we took on Adidas as a client, and I knew a little about the brand, but I didn't really know all the kind of the stories behind the two brothers, the rivalry with Adidas and Puma, and how that all happened. But what I found really interesting was the stories behind the shoes.
Mm.
And it kind of, it kind of bothered me in a way that so many people wore these shoes, but they didn't know the stories behind them.
Mm.
So how many millions of people wear Stan Smiths but have no clue who Stan Smith is? It was that kind of thing. And yet these shoes have so much cultural resonance that you can almost use some of these sneakers as signposts through time. And the more I learned about them, and not just the Adidas ones, because originally I was much more of a kind of a Nike fan. Sorry to all my Adidas friends, but I was originally a real Nike head. So it made me want to learn about all the brands, where they all came from, what the stories behind the shoes. And I started kind of collecting these stories, and I thought to myself, I wonder if there's a book on this, because every time I'd be telling these stories to my friends, jaws would be dropping. Some of these shoes these guys have been wearing for decades, and yet they had no clue. They didn't know, the story of the Puma Suede and its relevance to, the Black Power salute and things like that, or
Mhm.
and so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to write some of these stories up, and I'm going to send them out to some publishers and just see if there's any interest. And you know what, I really didn't think that there would be any interest, but I think I sent it out to 6 publishers, and 4 of them came back and said, yeah, we want to do this book. And so that was the very first book that I did. It was called Golden Kicks, and it was the stories behind the I guess the most famous sports shoes, as well as some of the not so famous ones.
Mhm.
Um, and that was where it really started, and I had such a great reaction to that, because I say, once people kind of know the stories behind these shoes, the authenticity, the kind of journeys that they've been on. um a lot of these shoes were kind of born on the court, but have then kind of lived a whole second life as fashion shoes, and again, people didn't know about that. So yeah, I found that so interesting, and got so much good feedback from that. And one of the things I did with that first book was, I think around that time, yeah, my favorite shoe was the Stan Smith.
Mhm.
And I had got in touch with Adidas, who had been really helpful on the book, and I just said to them, do you think there's any chance that Stan might write the forward to the book? And they said, well, we can ask him.
Mhm.
And the very next day, the phone rings, and my son picks up the phone. And he comes to me and says, Dad, there's a guy called Stan Smith on the phone. He wants to talk to you.
Wow.
So obviously, give me that phone. And yeah, I mean, we talked for an hour, and he was asking about the book, and he said, look, I'll be happy to write something.
Mhm.
So I got to know Stan very well. And Stan said to me that he'd been thinking about doing a book,
Mhm.
because he was kind of fed up himself with the fact that people didn't know who he was.
Mhm.
And so we started working on his book. I didn't write the whole thing, but I helped him come up with a concept and put it together. And that book was called, Some People Think I'm a Shoe.
Right.
um so that
Amazing
was,
title, by the way.
yeah, I didn't come up with that. That was Stan himself. Actually, I think he said it was one of his grandchildren came up to him one day and said, Grandpa, which came first, you or the shoe?
Wow.
So yeah. Uh, so yeah, we did that book together. Um, and then, during this whole journey, I never thought that I would end up doing, the Peter Moore one was the fourth book I've done. I never, I never really considered myself an expert or as an author, but the more you meet people, the more stories you hear, the more I thought, people need to hear this stuff. People love hearing this stuff.
Yes.
And while I'd been researching the first book, there was this guy's name I kept hearing all the time, which was Jacques Chassaing. And you guys will know him, but I noticed that, especially with the Addy fans, whenever you mentioned this guy's name, you know, they would start melting. They'd go all dewy eyed. And I realized that, yeah, this one guy had been responsible for so many of the greatest Addy shoes, that have ever been designed. But a lot of the guys at Adidas told me, well, this guy, he's very shy. He's very modest. He's very resistant to anyone kind of praising him.
Mm.
And I managed to track him down, and I got in touch with him. And I said, look, so many people revere your work.
Mm.
I just want to put together a book on your story, the story behind these shoes. And
Mhm.
Jacques initially was very reluctant, but I managed to talk him around, and so that became the third book I did, and we called it From Soul to Soul.
Yeah.
And that was a real kind of exercise in kind of helping people understand the role of a designer.
Mm.
Again, we all wear these things, but sometimes we don't appreciate the kind of work and the research and development that goes into these things. And Jacques had been involved, with his shoes. He's kind of a classically trained designer. So, the way he was trained, he would be designing the patterns, the cutouts, from that stage all the way through to production, which is, it's something you don't really see so much now.
Right.
Designers literally just design, but they're not involved in the development of the shoe, and they're not involved in the end production. Whereas Jacques had been. So that was just an amazing experience working with him on the book. And I still remember going to the Adidas archive and just sitting with him, going through, some of the shoes that he had designed. And, he was talking about them like they were his children, in many
Mhm.
ways. And what was funny, though, was also hearing, Jacques being so modest, he was very self-critical. And so shoes that to me were like, holy grails and, amazing moments just in the history of sneakers, he would be like, oh yeah, no, I designed that on a Friday afternoon, and I was like, I don't want to hear that stuff.
What shoe was that you mentioned that he almost popped your bubble on?
Oh, I don't know if I should mention it actually, but because he would probably kill me, and so would Adidas. But um, it was the campus. So
One of my favorites all time.
Wow.
right, yeah. Well, no, Jacques had told me that they basically came up with that as a response to the Puma suede,
This way.
and he basically said, we took a superstar, took the shell toe off, and made it in suede, and that became the campus.
It's what anyone who pays attention knows that that's exactly what that shoe is.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
love it. I love it.
Exactly. But the shoe, I guess, has kind of created its own legend. But as I say, Jacques probably wouldn't appreciate me telling you that story. So you didn't hear it from me.
Nope. Well, what's interesting about that shoe in particular is since last year, it has had an amazing resurgence
Mhm.
as now this bulky soled, chunky skate shoe type shoe that has just simply taken off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
My
absolutely.
year-old at home owns 2 pairs,
Yeah.
and I look at them and I'm like, "That is not my campus."
No.
That
Yeah.
ain't it, they're all over the place. I mean, over here in the States, this new version of the campus is all over.
Yeah.
It like where the samba came and cooled off, the campus jumped in. So it's amazing
Hmm.
to hear you share that story about it. Amazing to hear.
Yeah.
So, I've written a book before. I know that feeling of going through idea, publisher, the back and forth. How long did it take? I mean, because you got legends weighing in, Jacques, Stan, Tinker, and then gathering that information and back and forth editing process to completion. For one, did you ever become disillusioned with the idea along the process because it does take a while? And how long did it take?
I would say it probably, I mean, from Genesis. So when I was working on the Jacques Chassaing book, um, that was where Jacques actually introduced me to Peter, to Peter Moore. And, that came about because Jacques said to me, uh, you know, I've got a friend, do you mind if he art directs the book? And I was kind of like, well, it kind of depends who your friend is. And he's like, oh, it's this guy, Peter Moore. And I was like, Peter Moore. Yeah. Um, so having revered, Peter for much of my life, I started working with him, art directing the book. And as I was working with him, I started saying to Peter, look, when we're done with this book, Peter, I want to do your book, because everything that I'm hearing from you, just everything that people don't know about, we know about Jordan, we know about Air, but I was just constantly asking him to tell me more and more stories. And I said to him, I would love to do a book with you. And Peter, being Peter, he said to me, why the hell would anyone want to read a book about a one-hit wonder like me? And I had to laugh because as I've discovered, there are many, many people out there who want to know about Peter. So that was where it started. But then sadly, we lost Peter um, in April 22, and I kind of thought that dream was over.
Mm,
But so many people came to me and said, "Well, look, even more so now, you got to do that book. We got to make sure that Peter has a legacy, that Peter's not forgotten."
mhm.
And so, yeah, it was probably I want to say around like October 22 was when I got together with an amazing lady at Adidas called Ina Hoyman, who Ina had worked with Peter for probably about like 3 decades, from the time that he came to Adidas. And she had actually been putting together this incredible archive of
Yeah.
materials
Mhm.
during that time. And Ina said, well, look, everything on the Adidas side is here. I've got all this research that you can just dive into. Um, and when I saw that, I thought, wow, okay, we've got something here. I had also recorded most of the interviews and conversations that I had done with Peter. So I had all of that.
Nice.
And then, yeah, and then the I guess the big missing part of the puzzle at that time was the Nike side. And I know, and I don't know if you guys have found the same thing. Nike comms people they're quite resistant to anyone wanting to write anything about Nike. But in a way, I got lucky because I got to know Scott Reams, who used to run DNA at Nike,
Yeah.
the Nike archive,
Mhm.
and I I had actually met him. We were looking at a project before about Steve Prefontaine, who you guys will know is kind of one of the legends of the Nike story.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, so I got to know Scott and I told him what I was thinking about. And I said, well, how did Nike kind of feel about Peter these days? Because obviously, he went to the enemy as far as those guys were concerned.
Right.
Um, and what was interesting was that he said that when Phil Knight had written Shoe Dog, he'd kind of had to go back and kind of almost remember like all the people who were part of the Nike story.
Yeah.
And obviously Peter and with Peter you can't really tell Peter's story without talking about Rob Strasser.
Yep.
Yeah, and Phil had kind of almost had to go back and I guess remember just how big a part that those two guys especially had played in his success.
Uh-huh.
So Scott said, I think we could probably get some help from Nike. They're probably not going to completely throw the doors of the vault open to you, but they won't be resistant.
Mhm.
So once I had Ina and I had Scott, and then I had an amazing team of people who had all worked with Peter, and the support of the Moore family as well was a huge thing. Getting those guys on board, and Peter has three amazing sons who are all kind of chips off the old block. They're all like incredibly creative guys. His eldest son Devin's a copywriter. Dylan, his middle son, he's a creative director at Adidas. Funny enough, Adidas Golf. And then his youngest son Hagen is a graphic designer and marketer. So once I had those guys on board, it was kind of like, brilliant. Let's do this.
Right.
And yeah, I would say, it probably took probably a good year to put the book together, of just diving into all this research. We did in total probably almost 60 different interviews with people from both Nike, Adidas, and yeah, so that's kind of how the book came together. A lot of those interviews were just mind blowing. Meeting people who I'd only ever dreamed of meeting. People like Tinker Hatfield, who I didn't even realize, that there was that much of a connection. But so many, the Nike guys said, no, you need to go and meet Tinker. And we all know, Tinker's a legend in his own right. And I thought, would he even give me the time of day? And Scott put me in touch with him. I wrote to Tinker, and honestly, within about half an hour, he came back and he goes, "I think this is an amazing idea. Let me know. Let me know when you're in Portland."
Mhm.
And so I went over to Portland, and I thought I would probably just get like 20 minutes, like half an hour max with Tinker.
Yeah.
And I probably got, it was me who kind of had to, 2.5 hours later, it was me kind of saying, "Sorry, Tinker, I got to go to the next interview." But, he's such a fascinating guy. I could have spent the whole, day with him. But, and I didn't even fully understand just the impact that Peter had on Tinker's career. And he was telling me stuff that I don't know if he's ever told before, about how, he told me that the way he got to know Peter was because when he was still the Nike architect, he had been in a meeting and he had said something in this meeting to piss off Phil Knight. And Phil Knight said to Rob Strasser, who Tinker reported into, "Get rid of this guy." So he fired Tinker. But Rob Strasser saw something in Tinker, and so he went to Peter and said, "Phil's fired him. I don't want him to go. Can you hide him?" So Tinker went over and started working with Peter, and because Peter's design team, the whole Nike design team, was in a different building. So Peter basically stuck Tinker at the end of this corridor where he knew Phil Knight never went to.
Catch me if you can.
Yeah.
Nice.
But it was while Tinker was watching what Peter was doing that he started getting interested in sneaker design. And Tinker already had a kind of a design background, so it wasn't so much learning shoe design from Peter, because Peter never really called himself a shoe designer. But what Tinker said was that it was this kind of fearless attitude that Peter had is what he really learned from him, but also the whole idea of storytelling. It was this he said that as far as he was concerned, more than anything, more than all the shoes, more than all the posters, all the campaigns, what Peter was great at was he was a pioneer of storytelling in the sports industry.
Mhm.
Because what Peter had done, I guess, was when he first started doing those Nike athlete posters, he had kind of taken athletes at a time where you saw those guys on a weekend and then they were gone for the rest of your week. They were not celebrities, they were not personalities, but what Peter had done is kind of turned them into that.
Mhm.
On just in those posters, he turned them into characters.
Hmm.
And if you think back to the Iceman poster and Tiger
Yep.
Catcher,
Yep.
Storm and Norman, all of those,
Yeah.
um,
Legendary.
exactly. And so Tinker was saying, well, that's kind of, it was that he really learned from Peter, and this fearlessness, because he said, especially around the kind of time of Jordan and Air, especially, you have to remember that Nike was very much a running company
Yeah.
back then.
Mhm.
And so when Jordan first came on the scene and basketball was a thing, all the running guys who were kind of the predominant people in the company, they kind of were like, "What's the fuss? We don't get this. We're a running company."
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so Peter and Rob Strasser were always kind of having to fight their corner. So they kind of learned, how to handle the running guys, how to get things done.
Hmm.
And again, so Tinker was saying, he learned from that. And so when Peter kind of unleashed him on the first Air Pack, he was saying that, people from the running guys were kind of almost saying, what's so special about you? And they were leaving notes on his door and stuff. And, so he said it was in that environment, being with Peter and Rob Strasser, almost having to defend his work, I guess,
Yeah.
was what made him as a person.
Hmm.
So and this kept coming across. Everyone I met, I realized that more than a shoe designer, more than a kind of a creative, Peter was an amazing teacher, because everyone I talked to had stories about what they had learned from Peter. It was incredible. Um, so yeah, I mean, just that process, kind of discovering who the real Peter Moore was just, yeah, incredible. Something I'll never forget.
Yeah,
That's
that's some
amazing.
incredible commentary and stories you're sharing there, because it kind of, actually fills in some gaps to our Tinker Hatfield interview.
I
Yeah.
was
Right.
just thinking that same
We
thing,
were
Peter.
lucky to talk to him for 2.5 hours too, thinking we were only going to have him for a half an hour back then too. Um, but like you, I think that we were able to assemble and ask the right questions, because back when we spoke to him, it was at a time when all everybody ever wanted to talk about was an Air Jordan 3.
Right.
And we took a good 2.5, 3 weeks to research and do the job of finding and asking questions that nobody wanted to ever ask him, or didn't, because they were just all stuck on threes. Uh,
Hmm. Yeah.
so it's great that you're sharing this with us now, and it also confirms something that I had been hearing, was the fact that Tinker Hatfield's DNA is from Peter Moore, and you sort of have now really confirmed that in a big way for us. So
And
thank
even
you for
their offsite design building, their little pirate ship,
Mm.
allowed for some of that bravery because, as you said, Phil, he barely went there and definitely didn't go to the end of the hallway. And
Right.
so finding out that we didn't even find that out, that he was hidden in that
Yeah.
building on purpose, that's amazing. Thinking about Peter and all of the stories that you heard, this is a little off track from our normal questioning, but I want to know, what do you think inspires that kind of, in an industry that became about the designer,
Hmm.
about
Mhm.
your name getting credit for that thing, as all creatives sometimes in their career want? What inspired so many people to allow him to teach them? Because you don't find that a lot nowadays.
Yeah, because I think you're right, and in a way, I don't think Peter was a kind of maybe a natural teacher. But what I hear from people was that he taught by example. You know, he it was just by the act of watching what he did, and he allowed you to do that. You know, it sounded like he allowed people to get close. He was
Mm,
never very.
Mm,
He was never a kind of guy who was like, who wanted to kind of hoard, you know, things, or keep things to himself. He was really happy for people to learn from him, to see what he was doing. He never had this kind of fear of being replaced in many ways. I think in many respects he kind of encouraged that. And so that's why when you look at the people that have kind of, you know, come after him and the kind of leaders in you know, this industry. So Tinker, obviously, but Ron Dumas, who was Peter's kind of immediate successor at Nike, and um, is responsible for so many of those amazing Jordan campaigns. You know, he's the guy who first came up with the idea of dropping Nike from the swoosh. You know, he's the guy. The reason the swoosh is on its own now is because of Ron. Paul Gaudio at Adidas, John Munns, Shane Ward. You know, Shane Ward. What Shane Ward is doing right now with Fear of God. All of these guys. You know, you talk to them, and they say that they are who they are because Peter allowed them to learn from him. And so that, you know, in many ways, people, a lot of people have said to me, you know, what do you think Peter's legacy is? And I think they kind of expect me to say, well, it's obviously, you know, the Jordan 1, or the Dunk, or Adidas equipment, or originals. It's not, it's people. You know, it's all those people that are out there now, as I say, leading this industry. That's Peter's real legacy.
this is so important for something we have always talked about. And I think you only get to this point when you become older, more mature in the industry. You know, we revel in these stories. We want to find out these deeper details. This is what I want for our culture, is for people to actually get old enough and keep their sneakers, to keep
Right.
digging in and finding out these stories of the underpinnings of the industry, not the hype of the industry.
right?
Absolutely.
And you know, something you just said, Jason, with regard to Peter's legacy being investing in people as opposed to the shoes. I have to ask you about the cover. So it'll be hard to see here, but
Yeah.
for those who own the book or eventually will own the book, there's a handprint under the shoes on the cover of this
Yeah.
book.
Nice.
Was that to that point that you just said?
Yeah. Well, that is obviously that's Peter's own handprint. And in a way, it's so Peter actually did he very reluctantly did a kind of a portfolio book when he first joined Adidas. And it was kind of, Adidas wanted to show off that, you know, Peter was with them, and they wanted to show what he'd done in the past.
mm,
And on the front cover of that book was Peter's handprint. So that handprint is there for lots of reasons. I guess, firstly, yeah, because it's an homage to that first book, but also because Peter literally left his handprint on so many things, you know, so many, as you say, all the people, you know, the
Right.
people that he impacted, all the products, you know. You can't, you know, while we're saying that his legacy isn't the shoes, obviously that's how it manifests itself. You know, the millions of people that are well, still wearing, obviously, Peter's work. So yeah, that handprint is a very kind of subtle homage to that. To, you know, we could obviously, you know, we did that book sadly when Peter had passed, but it's kind of to say that, you know, Peter's still there. He's in these pages.
I love
Yeah.
it.
I love it.
Awesome.
I love hearing stories like this because it's just like he was, you know, say Tinker was hidden in plain sight.
Yeah.
You won't know that handprint is there until you actually hold the book in your hands.
Yeah.
Right.
That's it.
See it,
Right.
you know,
Absolutely.
and then
Yeah.
you hear stories like this. You're like, man, okay, the legacy
Yeah.
lives on. for
Well, the
sure.
handprint, I can't take credit for that. It was actually Hagen's idea, Peter's son. Hagen actually designed the front cover as well, because obviously, you know, Peter. The perfect scenario would have been for Peter to design the cover, but I just thought the very next best thing is to get, you know, his son to do it, and it's very much in the style of kind of Peter's artwork.
Mm.
So yeah, it was Hagen's idea to have the handprint there.
That's pretty
Speaking of that, do you think Peter would have designed his own book cover, being the person that he
Yeah,
was?
I don't know. That's a really good question, Steve. I don't know. I mean, you know, it was so, when we did the Jacques Chassaing book, um, I said to Peter, you know, would you design the cover? And he was really reluctant, and he came up with some ideas, and for whatever reason, you know, he was never quite happy with them.
Hmm.
And then he said to me, "Well, look, you know, you just come up with the idea." And I was like, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah, yeah, you know, you got this, you know." And he said, "Just think about it as a kind of, you know, what did he say? Oh, the cover of an album. That was it." He said, like, think of all your favorite album covers and think about what resonated. And there was also some input from Resale, and there was a bit of a fight there, and it ended up kind of being a little bit of a compromise, I have to admit. But you know, that cover is there because it was, you know, it was inspired by Peter. You know, Peter said to me, "Look, let's just put a pair of shoes on there, but make them the most beautiful pair of shoes anyone's ever seen, and it should be a pair of forums because, you know, that's Jacques' shoe. That's the one that everyone remembers him for." And it was like 3 days before we had to submit the thing, and I was like, okay, I need to go and find a pair of white forums from somewhere.
Mhm.
And I must have went to about 5 or 6 stores before I found a pair of just totally pure white ones.
Wow,
I went
white
round to
forums are
my,
hard to find.
yeah, absolutely. And I have one of the pairs that is actually on the cover right here.
Oh,
And
that's actually the pair that's on the cover.
yeah,
Ooh, those are
that's
clean.
one.
My God.
I was telling you,
Um,
man, white forums. Ooh, ooh.
yeah, and I just went over to one of my friends is a fantastic photographer, and we went in his garage, did lots of different poses, picked the right one, and that ended up being the cover. But you know, that all came from Peter as well. So, but I think, you know what, I don't think that he would have probably designed his own cover. I mean, I hope he would have been really happy that Hagen
Yeah,
did it. You know,
yeah. I think it worked out like it would have.
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an amazing cover. What would you say you want people to take away from owning this book?
You know, one of the things that we wanted to make sure with this book was that it just wasn't like a portfolio. So it wasn't just kind of, you know, here's what Peter did. We want it to be kind of a learning experience for people. We wanted people to take away kind of the best of Peter himself. So his philosophy, you know, his experiences, all the people that he'd had an impact on. And I guess that's what I think he would have wanted. You know, I guess it's not even that important. I guess what I would have wanted, or you know, the team of people that helped me. You know, we all felt that it needed to be something that, you know, Peter was always about, as I said, you know, the next generation of designers, creatives, and not necessarily just sneaker people. You know, architects, musicians, artists, whatever. And so I guess, yeah, what I hope people would take away is just an understanding of, you know, what made Peter, you know, all the experiences that he had, the kind of freedom that he gave himself and that he gave to all the people that worked around him. You know, I think it's all of that. You know, none of the so many people. There are so many myths, you know, around the Jordan story, Air, why he went to Adidas.
Right.
And again, that's another thing I kind of I wanted people to take away. I wanted to clear up in some
Mhm.
way. So there are so many myths around Peter.
Right.
I mean, one of the big ones right now that people are talking about is the whole band. You know,
Mhm.
the whole band thing around the Jordan 1. And
Yep.
I remember quizzing Peter about that, and how did that whole idea come about? And even he said to me, the shoe was never really banned as such. The obviously, um the NBA were not happy with the colorway, but he said to me, we had 30,000 pairs of shoes that were on a ship steaming its way to the US. Yet Michael was now not going to be able to wear that shoe. So what the hell were we going to do? How are we going to get people to wear that shoe?
Mhm.
So they looked, with everything that the NBA was doing, they were like, okay, well, I think it was more of a Rob Strasser idea, but it was like, the best thing you can do to create demand is almost restrict it from people.
Yep.
So that's how they came up with the whole, band idea. And they came, the famous ads panning down MJ and, the two
The black
bars and everything.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, they came up with that within a matter of days. They had to think on their feet, and they had to work around when MJ was available, and they shot that thing within a matter of hours, pretty much, and then it went out, and it's still one of the most memorable, commercials in sneaker history. But it was really, it was a solution to a problem.
Mhm.
Um, so it does kind of make me laugh when you see Nike still harping on about
Uh-huh.
the shoe being banned, and Nike didn't pay the fines. Well, Rob Strasser himself, there's the legend that Rob Strasser had said, "Oh yeah, get him to wear the shoe, and Nike will pay the fines." Well, apparently that is not quite true. I think maybe he said that initially, but when the Bulls were like, "Well, we can't be in disrepute. We can't be in a bad situation with the NBA."
Right.
So, Rob and Peter kind of capitulated and said, "Okay, put him in the red and white shoe." As I say, they still had the black and red shoe on the ship coming in. They
Mhm.
had they had to sell them. So that was one of the myths, and Peter talks about that in the book. There's other things like another one that cropped up recently was, um, there was even a short documentary on it about the allegedly that Peter and Nike had kind of stolen the Jumpman from, um, I think his name is Karo Rentmeester, the photographer.
Right. The
Right.
photographer,
Um,
the original Jumpman photo.
yeah, and Peter was completely open that he was totally inspired by that photo that he had done when MJ was still at North Carolina. Um, but he said that first of all they had actually licensed the photo from the guy at great expense.
Yep.
I think it was something like $15,000, which was a hell of a lot of money
Back
back
then,
then.
yeah, for a photo.
So exactly, so they hadn't exactly stolen it. But I think his other thing was that you know that that kind of pose was kind of MJ's signature pose. So you can't really take a photo of it and then almost claim to own a pose.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
that's Michael's thing. So if I'm taking a photo of it, I can't say, just because I'm the first guy that took the photo, I can't kind of say that I own that.
Right.
Well,
um
yeah. Yeah.
so that was I guess Peter's point of view. And they actually asked him if he wanted to do that shoot of the Skyline Jumpman poster, but he turned it down. um so that's another myth. Another what people, when the Air movie came out, so many people were asking me what I thought about the Air movie. And I don't know what you guys felt, but on one level it's a perfectly entertaining you know version of the Jordan story. But when really happened, and having just heard it all from Peter himself,
Right.
I kind of just watched that, you know, with gritted teeth, because, you know, the
Yep.
portrayal of Peter for a start was, you know, was just very wide of the mark. I mean, the portrayal of Rob Strasser, you know, Rob Strasser
Mm.
was a crazy, you know, 350-pound mountain of a man. He was, you know, very kind of ebullient, you know, and yet they got Jason Bateman to play him as this kind of buttoned up corporate skinny guy. And I was like, what the hell? You know,
Like that's not it.
yeah. Um, so as I say, yeah, there are so many kind of myths around
Yeah.
Peter. You know, the other big one is that, you know, people think that Peter kind of did the dirty on Nike and defected to Adidas, and that, you know, he literally went from Nike straight to Adidas. But, you know, it was a good, I think, like 3-4 years,
Mhm.
and he and Rob Strasser had left Nike. Rob Strasser had fallen out with Phil Knight, and he decided to go off and set up his own agency. And Rob and Peter were kind of two sides of the same coin. So it was inevitably wasn't long until Peter was going to go and join him. And yeah, a good 3-4 years later, Adidas came knocking, because, you know, they were on their knees at that time,
Mhm.
ironically, because of everything that Peter and Rob had done.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and when Peter told me that, you know, when Adidas first came knocking, you know, his first thought, having, you know, along with Rob being the main cheerleader for kind of trying to wipe Adidas off the face of the earth, was like, you know, hell no, you know, I don't even want to go to a meeting. Um, but
Mm.
Rob apparently, you know, he was really keen to kind of get, you know, back into a big sneaker brand, and I guess he had his own grudge with Phil Knight as well.
Mhm.
So, you know, when Peter had to be dragged to Germany, almost kicking and screaming, um, before he kind of, you know, decided, okay, you know, we're going to work with the former enemy. But so that's another big myth, which is hopefully dispelled in the book, because yeah, it didn't happen the way that a lot of people think it did.
I'm
So
personally
Jason,
glad it did. I'm
yeah,
so personally glad it did.
I gotta ask.
That's when I became, you know, I love the forum. I loved a lot of the things that happened, but the EQT, there's one
Yeah,
sitting right behind me in
right,
on one of my bottom shelves. It's everything that pulled me over at that point, because I was a track and field athlete.
right,
And that was the marker that showed me, okay, Adidas is serious about what they're doing. Nike had air, they look good, they're flashy, but it's not quite the same DNA anymore. And when
right.
Adidas got serious, Adidas got super serious about that, that was everything.
Yeah. Well, that whole story, the whole birth of you know, equipment, is fascinating in itself, because, you know, the first thing that Peter and Rob did when they went over to Adidas was kind of say, well, look, you can't see it, but you guys have totally lost your way. You know, you've forgotten what made you great in the
Mhm.
first place.
Yep.
And he really, I mean, Peter kind of really downplayed it in a way. He said all we did was kind of reminded them, you know, this is what your founder did, and this is what he said. You know, Adidas is about making the best for the athlete. Just go back to that, and you'll be successful again. And I guess, I mean, even now, I still have Adidas people who say, well, you know, I'm not sure how true that is. And I think, you know, when you look at that 80s period, they were they were making some amazing shoes. I mean, Jacques Chassaing was, you know,
Right.
that whole period with
Right.
the Forum and all the ZX shoes. But I think they kind of got to the end of the 80s, and that was where they were being really hammered by Nike and Reebok.
Yeah.
And so they kind of lost their heads. They were trying to find solutions. They were trying to find a kind of a way ahead, an identity. And that was where they totally forgot where they had come from, and who they were. And so
Yeah.
when Rob and Peter came in and said, you know, your way ahead is by going back, you know, that's what you
Mhm.
need to do. And so when you Steve, you're absolutely, when you look at those shoes, I think at the time, a lot of people kind of were like, well, what is this? What is this green? Who
Oh,
uses
yeah,
green on a
yeah,
sneaker,
yeah,
Um, but, Peter's point was, and he thought a lot about that. It wasn't just kind of on a whim that,
yeah,
equipment green is green. He
Mhm.
really thought about that. And he said, he wanted a color which was going to be, what red is to Coca-Cola, he wanted green to be to equipment.
yeah,
But at that time, no one was using green. But then when you look now, and obviously with the whole, you know, sustainability and all that, everyone uses
yeah,
green. People
yeah.
find excuses. But back then, it was kind of like, oh my god, what the hell are these guys doing?
It was so striking because they were in third place, as you said. They had been chasing colorways. They had been chasing this sort of gimmicky look. And the ZX line had a great number of colorways. They were awesome. But they were obviously chasing that sort of hypercolor 80s thing.
Mm,
And when they stripped that down, it was so striking to see white, gray, green. That
yeah.
to this day, if you see the Green Mountain logo on an Adidas box, you
Oh
know
yeah.
that that's serious business.
That's it. Yeah. No, it's amazing, and and it's just come back. They've kind of done a relaunch of equipment, and what's amazing is that they're kind of one to ones. I've seen some of the stuff, and it kind of reminds you just the quality of those products back then was just on a whole
Insane,
different level.
insane.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Jason, I was
absolutely.
going to ask you a question, and just to take a step back, you have these recorded audio files of the interviews with. Is the Moore family? Are they planning to do anything? Are you working on kind of demystifying, because it's just like you said, there's a lot of myths out there
Mm.
and bad
Well,
information.
yeah. I mean, one of the problems, I guess, that we had in a way was that we had to leave out so much stuff.
Mhm.
We had 300 pages, but we could have easily done 3,000 pages. And so the More family have actually created a website. It's still in its early days, but it's called, everyone should check it out, petermorecreated.com. And the idea is to be able to kind of act as a kind of archive, a repository for Peter's work, his influence, his legacy. Um, so that, yeah, people can go in, really learn about Peter. And yeah, I guess in a way we want the book just to be kind of a jumping off point
Right.
for people's kind of
Mm.
whole learning experience with Peter, because ultimately that's what he wanted people to do, was just to learn. That was it. So it's great that the the guys have put that website together, and it's for everyone. They want people to share their stories. So
Mm.
it doesn't matter if you didn't know Peter. If you had an experience with one of Peter's products, even, go on that website, share your stories, because that's what it's for.
That's
Awesome.
amazing.
Awesome. Dee's
That's
question
awesome.
was great because it led me to another one we wanted to put out there as we close out the interview with you, sharing some things that you're working on. You and Kish Cash, are you still doing the Soulful podcast? And what's happening with that?
Yeah, no, suddenly we both of us basically just got busy. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, Soulful was a fantastic experience, and it came about. Um, a friend of mine was working for probably, yeah, the leading podcast production company in the UK,
Mhm.
and said to me, all these stories that are in your books, that they're just fascinating. Would you fancy doing a podcast? And I said, well, yeah, let's give it a go. And I got together with Kish, and you know, Kish is he's one of those real legends, especially in the UK, of sneaker culture. He's been around since the year dot. There's nothing that he doesn't know about this culture, and he has this incredible archive.
Yeah.
I think the last time I asked him, he had about, I don't know, 3,500 pairs of shoes, and that's probably into the 4,000s now. But for him, it's not just about collecting and having shoes. It's about the relevance of those shoes to points in culture. And he has a proper archive. And I've been to the Adidas archive. I've been to the Puma archive, so I know what a proper archive is. And Kish is not that far behind, in terms of the way he's so meticulous about it. So Kish was just my kind of natural, I thought, well, if I'm going to have a co-presenter, it's got to be Kish. And, Kish was one of the first guys in the culture who was so kind of welcoming to me when I was still kind of fairly fresh to it. A lot of people at that time, when the culture was kind of was smaller, were very guarded. It was like, if you were coming in as a kind of a newbie, it was like, who the hell are you? Whereas Kish was one of the first guys who just kind of, embraced me and what I was trying to do in telling those stories. So yeah, we had some, amazing guests, and just, between us, the kind of people that we had on there, Stan Smith was, one of the first he had to be. And Stephen Smith, you guys talked to him not that long ago, but even, people that you wouldn't necessarily know about, but who do great things. So Elizabeth Semmelhack, who runs the Barter Shoe Museum. We had some fantastic people, but it was one of those things. We started during lockdown, so it was really easy. We could call these people up, and we knew they weren't busy, so they couldn't turn us down. But we just got busy. We have talked about, I guess it would be the third season, and I'm up for it. I know Kish would be up for it, but it's just a case of finding the time to do that kind of thing. And right now, that's the tough bit. But I would love to.
Awesome. Well, we're going to continue to nudge you on that to make sure you and Kish carve out a little time based on everything that's going on in you guys' lives to crank out, even if it's a half season worth of episodes. That was an amazing series that I thoroughly enjoyed.
Thank you.
I really, the fact that it was coming from outside of America with such authenticity and authority.
Right.
Everybody looks to the States to be the thought leaders and the historians for this. And, us, we're more of an international appeal for everything that happens. So we have an appreciation for you guys doing what you did. So when you guys bring that back in any capacity, we are here for it, just so that you know. So with that being said, are you doing another book?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question everyone's asking me. Right now, I don't have any plans to, but hey, I didn't have plans to do the Peter Moore book. It just kind of naturally came together. And Jacques was like, well, you've done me, you've done Peter, like, who's next? I know the person I would love to do, and talked about him. I don't know if he would do it, but again, right now it's kind of about finding, the time to do these things, because books, as you guys will know, they're kind of all-consuming projects. And unfortunately, writers don't make a huge amount of money out of, writing books. Again, as you guys will know, but they're labors of love. They're you do them out of passion, not to make money. But it means you kind of have to have a day job at the same time to do these things. And sadly, it's the day job that gets in the way of doing them at the same time. So yeah, it's working out that conundrum. But I won't say no. I don't know what it will be next, but you guys will be the first to know.
So on top of being able to make sure we shout from the mountaintops that everyone should buy Peter Moore's Sneaker Legend, how else can we support the great Made by Jace? What's coming up that we should be looking out for? And how can we make sure everybody knows to, number one, follow you for updates and, support you however? Anything coming up?
Well, these days I'm kind of all the energy that I guess I would have been putting into writing. My day job has been for a while in filmmaking, documentaries and things like that. And I'm still fairly new on that scene, but I've got a few things I'm working on right now. They're not necessarily sneaker related, but they are sport related.
Mm.
I probably can't really say too much right now.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got a movie in the works, which is about two. Well, they're British athletes, but you guys in the US kind of adopted them in the early '80s because of the whole Moscow Olympics
Hmm.
situation. That's all I'll say on that one. And the,
All right,
Nice.
Chase.
Yes.
and the other one is a Formula One documentary. Again, I
Mm.
can't say too much about what that is, but Formula One. I know you guys in the US have totally fallen in love with Formula One.
Hmm.
It's more of a historical one, but I'm calling it, the last dance for Formula One. So
Okay.
yeah,
Very cool.
Wow. Last
Very
dance for
cool.
Formula One.
Very
yeah.
cool.
Wow. Okay. All right. Leave it right there. Leave it right there. Leave it right there for us. Oh man, when people get to the end of this one, man. So, Jace, man, thank you, bro. This is our longest episode yet, for the record, since our
Oh,
return.
sorry.
And
No,
no.
no, it's
This is a
perfect.
highly valued longest episode yet. For you being able to go so in depth on the journey, for you as a writer, lover of footwear, and being able to produce. Again, we got to show this amazing book. Put me on center screen. Put me on center screen. This amazing book right here. Peter Moore, Sneaker Legend. Everybody needs to go out and get this book. Um, for you to be able to pour so much of yourself into it, and be able to allow other people to, sort of sit with you and trust you and put out these incredible, highly valued and important stories about sneaker history, which is what we're all about. Thank
Absolutely.
thank you. We sincerely, you are one of our own, even though you reside across the pond. So you should know that you are one of ours. And
Thank you. I appreciate that.
anything you need from us, I'm sure Ridiculous Indeed, they'll tell you the same.
No doubt. No
You
doubt.
you you have anything you need from us to help you on your mission to continue doing the dope work you do, man. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, gents. It means a hell of a lot to me because as I said at the top, I love what you guys are doing. You're educators. I
Thank
just think educators, teachers are the most valuable people that we have on this planet. And, people say to me, well, what is it about the shoes? And, it's not so much about the shoes, but it's the fact that this culture, these products are just the confluence of so many things, history, design, art, business, music, and that's what it's really about. The shoes are just kind of the starting point, the bridge, and that's what you guys are teaching people. So yeah, I really appreciate what you guys do.
thank you, Jace. Thank
Yes,
you,
sir.
man. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
This one's going down in the books, ladies and gentlemen. Jason Coles, aka Made by Jace, the author of Peter Moore,
Yeah.
Sneaker
Sneaker
Legend.
legend.
Shout out to Resale. Closing remarks, D.
Man, I could sit here for hours and just. I want to hear more of these stories. That's why I'm just like, I can only
Well,
imagine what's on those recordings, Jason. Like,
oh
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
fascinating.
that was the thing. That there's so much. Next time I'm over your way, guys, we got to do that. Let's just spend
yeah.
a day. Let's just talk because there is so much that I know you guys would love to hear.
Mm,
And Peter was such a remarkable guy. The things that he did that people don't even know about. And as I say, there was so much that couldn't go into the book. And I'd love to share all of that with you guys, and for you to pass it on to your students as well. Because Peter, everything he did was a case study in many ways of,
Mm,
of how you succeed in this business, So yeah, next time I'm over your way, I'm coming over.
Yeah, we're gonna get you
absolutely.
a Tinker Hatfield interview for us.
Yeah.
Ridiculous?
Just fascinating. I've long said that these are the kind of things that we need in the culture, and it's self-serving in a way, because these are the things that interest me, that interest us as we get older. Many of us 70s and 80s babies who still do love sneakers,
Yep.
who have blown past the part where they tell us they're for kids or only for sports. And so to find an archive like this, to find communication like this, is just the best for me.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure entirely. Thank you, guys. Yeah, those words are not lost to me. I do appreciate it. Absolutely.
We'll be checking in for sure, Jace.
All right. Take care, guys.
Too much.
See ya.